Hello, Inspired Intentions listeners. We made a big change this January, and it's a change that we are really, really excited about. We actually added a physician to our team at Skyterra. Her name is Dr. Teresa Campanile. And here we are at the beginning of March, and this is now the third podcast that we have had her on. So we're really excited, obviously, to have her as part of our team and to get her expertise for our guests and our staff and to bring that expertise to you as well. So, Dr. Campanile, welcome back for the third time to the Inspired Intentions podcast.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Could you, for our listeners, just remind us of who you are and what your expertise is?
Sure. As you said, I'm Dr. Teresa Campanile. I am an integrative and internal medicine doctor. I've been practicing medicine for 14 years now, and I operate in both worlds. I like to know what the standard medical system has to offer, and then also what natural modalities we have within our own locus of control to affect our health. So I joined Skyterra because, this is a super powerhouse when it comes to especially that second part. But I joined here in January, and I am helping our guests and our community learn how to be healthy in a very practical way.
I think one of the really powerful things we all realized early on is we at Skyterra and you speak the same language around pillars of health and finding what's really healthy for your body and being really intentional about it. So it just felt like you were meant to be part of our team from the beginning. So we're so happy to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And just listeners, just a reminder, we had Dr. Campanile on episode number 166, January 8th, 2024. And then again on episode number 168, January 22nd, 2024. So please go back and listen if you haven't already. But today's topic is something that is really interesting, and it is all about how changing your behavior can impact your health for the better and how you have control over your health way more than you may think. And this is something I know that Dr. Campanile is very, very passionate about. And so what I really want to do is spend some time kind of setting the scene and listening to your philosophy, Dr. Campanile, on why you are so passionate about this. So what are we talking about?
Yes, thank you, Rachel. That's exactly right. So I think, this topic is very important to me and very important to anybody who is serious about trying to affect their health. The topic of habit and pattern formation really first needs to start with a discussion of our medical model. In short, I think we all know that we have something wrong in the way we think about health and disease. Our current medical system is very constructed around identifying states of disease or ailments as things that the body's doing wrong.
Mm. So you're sick, let's fix it.
Exactly. It characterizes things as rogue states that need external correction. And in large part, I think we know that that's wrong. That's probably describes a very rare subset of medical conditions. For the most part, what we're learning is that chronic medical conditions and most ailments and physical symptoms that our bodies are communicating with us are representative of our bodies actually doing something very, very healthy. So a lot of disease states are adaptations to an exposure or a stimulus, and your body's trying to help you, and it is buffering and finding ways around that. And only when it gets tired of or runs out of something does it start to show you that as a weakness or as a symptom. It's communicating that with you. So we've learned this about diabetes. Diabetes is not a rogue state where your body forgets how to metabolize sugar or other proteins or caloric sources. It is an adaptation to something that is threatening, or chemicals that weaken our insulin status, or deficiencies in magnesium and chromium that make it difficult for us to digest our food. So our bodies are working around that, and they start to secrete more insulin as a means to cope with that. And enhance our survival. Now, as that process continues and continues, of course, we start to feel the wear on that. So diabetes, for instance, is not a maladaptive state. It's an adaptive state to a toxic environment or stimulus, and our bodies are trying to help us cope with that. So that exists for diabetes. That exists for osteoporosis. The more we learn about disease, we understand what the body is trying to do for us in those instances. So effectively rethinking the fact that our bodies are trying to hurt us and thinking that they are actually responding to stimulus is a very empowering thought, because it means that the real cure, the real health path, is to change that stimulus. So effectively, what I'm trying to say is this topic is so important because changing or affecting your patterns, your habits, having agency over your environment and the stimuli in your life is absolutely our number one medicine. It is our internal locus of control. It is our birthright to be able to learn to take care of these bodies. And it's our real medicine. Everything else is just Band-Aids and buying us time to do that. So I think it's really important to know what that means. What goes into pattern formation? What goes into our habits? Why are our bodies even primed to be able to do that? And how can we capitalize on that?
I love this. So let me just make sure that I understand. So what you're saying is that there is some stimulus in our body that our body is responding to when the medical model labels it as a disease state. So if we can change that original stimulus or somehow teach our bodies how to respond to it, maybe we're not having to immediately jump to medicine.
Yes.
Okay. And then something that you said that I want to pull out again, because I think it's beautiful and powerful, is the body never hurts itself. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I think that's really important for listeners to hear.
Yes. Physiological adaptation means our body has intelligence in ways that we might be cognitively trying to wrap our heads around, but it's always doing something to try and help us restore homeostasis. That is our prime directive, is to be healthy and learn and adapt to our environment. So the word disease, really I like to pronounce it as dis-ease. It's our bodies showing us that they are not in their state of maximum ease, maximum homeostasis, balance. So when we are off ease or dis-eased, it's our body trying to get back on track. It has immense capability to do that. It needs our help.
And that's what we're going to do today, is help people.
Yeah.
And I know that, kind of setting this scene for our listeners is very important to you, because you want to make sure that your philosophy comes across in a way that listeners know and understand. So we're not, and you specifically aren't saying like, the purpose of this is to take everybody off medicine. No, the purpose is to give you more power over your body, help you think about it in a little bit of a different way, and then maybe build habits to build your health.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying that, because as I said before, I am also a standard internal medicine doctor. I also prescribe medications, but medications and health modalities are medications and healing are two different categories for me. Medications control the situation, and healing is about restoring natural states. And medications never restore natural states. If you think about it, there's never been a medication in history where the medication reverses and cures the disease state. There's no diabetic medication that when we started using it reduced the number of diabetes that we diagnosed in subsequent years. So the same exists for our hypertension medications, our cholesterol medications. They don't affect what is happening to us from the root up. They control the situation. So yes, I think it's monumentally important to think of those two things categorically, almost separately.
When you meet with guests here at Skyterra, or you meet with patients not at Skyterra, and you kind of bring up this idea of, this control is within you, I imagine that people may have not had that experience or heard that from a medical professional in the past. What is people's reaction when they hear, this is about you owning your body?
I love that question because the response is highly variable. I feel that I can't even always detect externally what somebody is going through, but even from my own experience, I know that sometimes that very thought is really exciting, and then other times that thought is very daunting. Feeling that perhaps it's my responsibility to fix this. That's very topical to what we're talking about today because well, fear gets in the way of our progress in a lot of ways, but on a very biochemical level, fear shuts down a lot of the pathways that we're about to talk to in terms of receptivity to change. And as our neurons are trying to learn new behaviors, when we're in fear states, it's hard for our physical cells to learn new patterns. Their channels are shut down for that. So it's very natural to sometimes be overwhelmed with the thought that, oh, this is within me and therefore I have to fix this. And that's a little bit overwhelming, maybe. However, understanding where that comes from and that feeling of overwhelmingness and what you can do about it and what it means is the first step to overcoming that because staying in a fear state will absolutely get in the way of your goal. But in short, yes, it's normal to have a range of reactions to that statement. It is empowering, but empowerment also comes with responsibility. ... We're about to talk about how that responsibility is a shared responsibility. It can be a very fun responsibility, and there's ways to make that quite successful.
So our goal for the end of this podcast, listeners, is to give you some of that. So stay with us. We're going to really get into it. Dr. Campanile, so I think the question of the day is, why is it so hard to make changes that we know are good for us?
Excellent. So if the whole task here is great, if I change my patterns and the stimuli, my body will naturally help me out and learn around that. Then the question is, right, why do we have this sense that that's the hardest thing in the world? And I'm as human as the next person. I feel the same way. What's interesting is that the medical and biochemistry, when you dig into this, actually suggests that pattern learning and behavior change is really easy for our bodies, right? Very not what we feel. But I want to explain to you what I mean by that. The chemistry of behavior and adaptation is very interesting. It means we are primed to be learning minute to minute, second by second, and we're actually doing it right now. The perception that we are not adapting and changing our behaviors and that we are stuck is a misunderstanding of, really in short, we are just giving ourselves the same repeated stimuli, and therefore we're seeing the same repeated outcomes. But if that stimulus was to change, we would change around it. That adaptive biological humility, biological adaptation never leaves us. It is there from the moment you're born to your very, very old and wiser years. We are adaptive till the very last day. So the chemistry behind this, I think, is really interesting to talk about. And if we can delve into it just a little bit, because this will be a good reference point to draw back on. But basically, our brains can be tasked to do anything at any time, even without a real strong memory or pattern built behind it. So you could, in theory, ask your brain to do something you've never done. I've never been to a play, and you could bring me to that play and I would be able to experience the colors, the range of emotions. I might even be able to anticipate. I've never been to something like this, but I'm starting to, I don't know, I have front row seats and I'm wondering if that's going to make me a little bit nervous or a little socially anxious. Or it's interesting that your brain is already starting to work on mechanisms about how that experience is going to feel. You've never even done it before. So you could, in a moment, you could ask your body to do a workout it's never been. It will figure out how to do it in real time. But the neural pathways that are involved when you ask your body to do something once versus when your body knows you are going to be asking it to do that repeatedly are very different. We give those different names. It's episodic memory versus procedural memory. And well, that's what some people call it. This is within the confines of something called the Hebbian learning theory, that with repetition, our brains change how they perform. But effectively, what I'm trying to say is you can do a task and create the expectation for your body that you're just asking it to do it in that moment, in that context. And then you can also do a task in a way that is trying to communicate with your body that this is a new intended path for me. So there are multiple ways we can call on our bodies to do action for us. So habit forming is about that second option. How do we signal to our bodies that we want this? We want this in our lives. We want to be able to do this easily.
This is not a one-time thing. This is going to be something that I am going to do repeatedly.
Yes, this is part of me now, and this is where we're trying to get. So there are very specific, and we're just starting to understand the chemicals that go into that. What we do understand is that habit strengthening, which is that second pathway of trying to prime our brains, there are a lot of receptors and chemicals built into communicating that with our brains. So dopamine and epinephrine, for example, you may have heard of those brain hormones. Dopamine is a happy activation, motivation. Epinephrine is a focus, kind of adrenaline hormone. So those hormones are released for us on a day-to-day basis with the anticipation that we might encounter new stimuli, and our brains, naturally, they like challenges. They want to be able to learn around that. So those hormones are built into us in order to just spark us into a new learning pathway. And then towards the end of the day, we tend to release serotonin when we are more satiated. We have filled our bellies with healthy food. We have encountered the people in our day that make us feel better. And serotonin is okay, I feel okay. I've gotten what I've needed out of this day. I'm safe. And that cycle of seeking new exposures and stimuli, the brain loves that. It wants to learn and be dynamic and change. And then it wants the signal at the end of the day that it did a good job and that's worth doing again. And that cycle of engagement and reward and engagement and reward over and over and over again is what teaches our brain, this is now your more optimal way of operating. So some of that is built into our day-to-day diurnal hormonal health. We also know that there are receptors called NMDA receptors that detect when a behavior happens frequently. These receptors are basically efficiency receptors. Your body is not stupid, and it knows that if you've put effort into doing something 3 times, you are creating the expectation that we're going to do it again. And the body will start to make preparations for that. It wants to do that with greater efficiency, with greater benefit, with greater outcome. So one of my favorite stories to tell to really anchor this is about how neurofeedback is a therapy that some people seek out when they are having a hard time changing a pattern. And neurofeedback is basically a session where they connect you to electrodes that monitor your brain waves. And let's say you have a person who is really having a hard time breaking that monkey mind, hyperactive brain stimulation, a really hard time calming. In brainwave terminology, we would call that beta wave predominance. So the beta waves are, well, kind of like we were talking about, those activation, excitement, focused brain waves. And they're helpful, but they have to be able to turn off. We also need to be able to engage our theta waves and calm and be in a relaxed, reflective state. So some people really identify with being stuck in that beta wave state. We used to call that ADHD. Um, Nowadays, many people are stuck in beta wave physiology, not because of ADHD, but because of screen time. Keeps us very locked in that state. So anyhow, it can be very hard for some people to come out of beta wave physiology. One of the things they can do in neurobiofeedback is connect you to a monitor where you just see whether you're in beta or theta, and they'll ask you to do some breathing exercises. Just calm yourself down, and you'll see that this person takes a lot of breathing to activate a theta wave, but eventually they do it, and then their brain goes right back into beta wave. Well, what they'll do is they've designed this screen where you watch like a little fish swimming. It has nothing to do with your anxiety or what you're thinking of. But what they teach this fish to do is every time you go into theta wave, the fish starts to swim. And when you go back to beta wave, the fish stops swimming. What that does is the brain likes change so much. It loves to see a fish move. It just prefers to change or to see something happen rather than not happen. That person, every time it sees the fish swim, the brain will stay in that theta wave activity longer just to be able to see the fish swim a little longer. It's a video game that is based off the premises the brain would prefer something to change, something adaptive, something stimulative, moving. We prefer that over not. So this is an example of a person who can learn to stay in theta wave just because that excites their brain more. So I bring that back to our discussion because the concept that my brain is locked in, I'm stubborn, my patterns are old, I can't change them, it's fundamentally not true. Our bodies absolutely are more rewarded when we challenge them, we stimulate them, we ask them to change. The problem is we don't really ask our bodies to change that much. So that is kind of where I want to bring us when I bring up this concept of let's start to stimulate ourselves in different ways. Again, I don't want that to be an overwhelming feeling. I'm telling you, it's what your brain wants to do, and it's what it wants to do to the end.
I have a really great example from here at Skyterra. So, behind the scenes of Skyterra, we've talked about this a few times on the podcast. We have our Skyterra University where we train our team on how to give presentations that are engaging, that our guests are going to remember. And one of the things that we talk about is how to add elements to your presentation that will release dopamine in our guests' brains so that they will remember what we're saying, because we want them to remember what we're teaching them long after they leave Skyterra. So we talk about things like how to have a surprising element to your presentation, how to include a story, how to engage all of the senses. And it's exactly what you're talking about, which is, this is going to be something new. This is going to be something important in that brain craving change.
I love that. There are so many of these concepts that are naturally built into the way I notice things are run here at Skyterra. You've just referenced something that in the psychology literature would be referenced as stacking, reward stacking, and how can we cluster things together that reinforce dopamine. And being in a classroom with community, number one, people's minds are more receptive to the excitement of the change of that lecture. Number two, they have probably been really well fed here that day. So there are natural dopamine reward systems after we have a good meal or treat ourselves to something that we just view as very healthy or rewarding. And all of those things are active here at Skyterra because we're treating ourselves well. And then you say, and if we stack another stimulus that gives you a little dopamine surge just for 30 seconds, we've just stacked 3 or 4 things within the day that are all giving you intensive reward. That's very powerful. They're the NMDA receptors, which we are also going to get into. Well, let's just jump into that now if we can, actually. So you're talking about how can we stack the deck in our favor?
And
Okay.
how do we signal to the body, this is a habit that is my habit for life. This is what I'm now going to do.
Yes, excellent. So if we take the first part of, we said the first part of this is really about instructing the body that we have a new path for it. And it wants to be put on task. It wants to know what we're aiming for so that it can adapt and master and conquer that. So if you believe me when I say that, and the literature would back me up, but that is what we have to believe in before we can move forward in this conversation. The brain wants that directive first. Once we have that directive, then we're going to practice it repetitively and make the reward really strong. So in 3 steps, it's basically make sure you have a strong directive, understand what you're aiming for, because then your body will be put on task, and that's what it enjoys doing. Number 2, do it repetitively and within certain context and with stacking. And we will come to these terms because they're very helpful to understand and probably things that you're inclined to do naturally, but doing them often enough that your brain can actually learn that fish is moving and see it move longer and then get excited about it and lock it in. And then lastly, understanding that there are certain environments where we are naturally primed to want to reinforce behaviors. So understanding what those environments are so you can place yourself in them.
So how do we get into the nitty-gritty? What are the practicalities of this? How would we make changes and create new habits in our lives?
Great. So if we say the first thing is we need to make sure that the instruction to our body is strong. We need that vision. We need the end goal. We need the directive. Once we have that, we can move on to learning how to reward that pathway and making it stick. But the first thing is just making sure that that picture is clear. So identity-based habit forming. Sometimes we set out with a specific goal in mind. I want to lower my resting heart rate. I want to lose 5 pounds. And that is really a goal-based habit. Identity-based habits are proven to be much more likely to develop into long-term habits. And what I mean by that is if a habit doesn't have a short-term benchmark, the whole reason you're trying to embark on that habit is because you believe it will bring you qualities and contribute to the identity that you are seeking for, then it's more likely to be incorporated in your life and easier to be incorporated into your life. Easier is an interesting word because you could ask 5 different people, how hard is it to implement this change? And it might be easier for one person, more difficult for the other. So this points to a whole concept of, again, this has been given a lot of terms, but there is a gap there between what you want and what you are doing. There is a limbic friction, which is how Dr. Huberman tagged this as, again, just a gap between what it takes for us to implement or motivate a behavior change to get over that hump. But basically what we're speaking of here is we need an identity, we need a track, and that requires a very firm image of where you're going. So identity formation really comes down to not letting fear get in your way. So many of us, when we start to think about our identity, actually reflexively think back on the past, what we have failed on, what our old patterns are. To be honest, that has very little to do with your identity. That has more to do with your ego, subconscious fears, your self-esteem, self-consciousness. It has more to do with you assessing your safety and limitations and being worried about your repeat patterns. So there's a lot of focus when it comes to identity strengthening that comes down to positive thinking, but I don't know that it's positive thinking. In my mind, it's really not trying to artificialize anything and pick the positive over the negative. To me, it's really about being realistic, which means in the moment and aiming for the future. If our question is, what am I aiming for? Your past has very little to do with that other than maybe understanding your patterns and what you're working against, but keeping a focus on how you picture yourself when this is accomplished. What does that really look like in its entirety is much more powerful. And it tends to bring out more positive, exciting things. Again, we're trying to emulate that fish-like excitement behavior for our brains. So thinking ahead is more exciting for the brain than thinking backwardly. So that's the first thing, is picking a goal that is really forward-thinking, present moment thinking.
And the question we should ask ourselves is what? And the reason why I ask this is we teach our signature class here at Skyterra is Inspired Intentions, which is what we named our podcast after. And it's taught by our executive producer, Alan Broyhill. And the question is, who is the type of person that I want to be? This is the type of person that I want to be versus this is the thing that I want to accomplish. Is that the question?
I think that's a great way to ask that question. What parts of myself do I want to feed and support? Is another way to ask that. Modeling is a very common strategy in habit formation. Modeling means, yes, using a person, a guided image of somebody or something external to you that you place value on and trying to emulate that. There is absolute value in modeling. I want to bring a little bit of caution around modeling because we also live in an age where it's easy to model off. We can model based on who we're watching become healthy around us. So community is extremely helpful in habit formation because we naturally find, whether you're thinking about it or not, you're noticing, hey, she did awesome during that workout. And your brain gets excited about that. It sees the fish move and it wants to be prepared for the next time. So we do that very, very naturally. The only reason I think you can hear some hesitation in my voice is that modeling is supposed to come out in community formats. And these days, we have a lot of challenges to that. There's some modeling. And I'm not saying you can't find support. There are great support groups online, support groups that emulate the goal that you're really reaching for and that true community feeling. But there's also a lot of evidence that, when we're following a particular figure on Instagram or Facebook, for whatever reason, because of the way we've constructed that world, it tends to kind of work against our self-esteem and our confidence. And there's just a lot of caution around that world because it's not exactly the real thing. And in certain contexts, you can come out of following an Instagram account or a Twitter account with a very low sense of what you can accomplish. And that does not usually come out of natural modeling. Natural modeling, when you see somebody else do something next to you, believe it or not, it does not usually make you feel less capable. Seeing other humans accomplish things is like seeing the fish move.
In real life versus something that's been, really created online to have this. Who knows what's behind the scenes with that airbrushing or...
Correct. When you see an artificial life constructed online, it makes you feel really inadequate. When you see a real person in real life with real emotions and real challenges do something kind of hard and do it, everybody in the room, they've tracked the biochemistry of this. I mean, this is not just an emotional conversation. This is they call this the champion biochemistry. Champion biochemistry is... they have studied this on high-performing athletes, on people like Tony Robbins who can just amp up a crowd for 12 hours straight. They wonder what is going on in your brain chemistry at that time that makes you overcome something so hard. I think Tony Robbins said once in his most exhausted states, even jet-lagged, they wanted to know how do you overcome that and surge such that you can support a stadium of people, and they were tracking his cortisol, testosterone, the exact same biochemistry they would track in an athlete who is losing a competition and is able to overcome that, focus in, hone in, and conquer. So the chemistry of that is, they end up surging a lot of things like adrenaline and testosterone and actually minimizing their cortisol. A low cortisol, high adrenaline, testosterone state is a highly focused and productive, can conquer anything state. Interestingly, very similar chemistry to what happens in women when they are needing to do difficult things on behalf of their children. The protective nature, focus, laser focus, I can conquer anything. So we all have that physiology, and it comes out in really interesting times like that. So, but anyways, I bring all that up to say the coolest part about that is at one point they tested the biochemistry of the people in the audience when that athlete is overcoming, like just taking over the competition, or they tested the people in the audience at Tony Robbins, one of his big conferences, and everyone's chemistry was changing like the athletes, like Tony. So we change our chemistry together. And I say that to get back to our conversation about community. We influence each other positively, and that's very different than the online world where that can be a little bit threatened.
That is such a beautiful point. And I felt that too, having been a sports fan in a stadium. I feel that. I know exactly what you're saying.
Absolutely. And it's worth knowing that because, listen, we're talking about some ways that you can hijack your own learning patterns and change chemistry. And depending on what you're working on, it might be a smaller task or a bigger task. But do not forget that even when your own chemistry is really difficult to change, we can lean on each other. We can piggyback on each other's biochemistry. So that's something that's worth thinking about for anybody who's finding that they are they're feeling refractory. They're putting a lot into pattern change, a lot into habit change, and it's frustrating because it's not changing the way they need to. It's extremely helpful to know maybe I could amplify this change by being a part of a community, by maybe being in person with other people who are working on this at the same time as I am, if that's possible. So those things are true.
Take a class together, come to Skyterra, seek out a community of people in real life.
Yes, and without knowing all of that chemistry, that's absolutely why people inherently know that benefit over an intensive like Skyterra retreat. They know that they're leaving with that amped up biochemistry. They can feel it.
Where does mindset come into all of this?
Yeah, so identity formation and mindset are a little bit different. Identity is, have you given your body a strong signal of what it's aiming for? Have you thought about what that looks like? Who is doing that around you that's familiar to? What you're going to feel like when you have accomplished it. Mindset is very different. Mindset means, very simply, there are times when our brain is wanting to look at that fish move and other times when it's on lockdown and not open to change. We have to be aware of that because specifically I'm talking about things like pain, high stress, low sleep. These are conditions where even if you're in the right environment, the right stimulus, doing the exercise, practicing your habit, if you're in that state of mind, your neurons do not want to adapt. So the receptivity of your neurons to change, to learning new behaviors really comes down to is there anything telling them not to learn? And that's mindset. So mindset, we've shown that if you are in a state of gratitude, love, calm, a full state, it can be much, much easier to get your dopamine, NMDA receptors primed, all of these learning pathways. They get really jumpy around seeing the fish. And when we're in states of pain or stress, they're not. So how do we adapt our mindset? How do we keep ourselves in a receptive mindset? This is not the same thing as saying, stay focused on your goal, stay focused on your goal. This is about how do I make sure that on an average day, I am operating in a state of relaxation, gratitude, love, peacefulness, because then on average, I will be more adaptive to my environment. So many people advocate starting your day with a mindful-based practice that specifically addresses your mindset. Common way to do this is gratitude practices. And again, it's not just a thought, not just thinking about what am I grateful for. That doesn't really work very well, just having a list of things you're grateful for. What would be more powerful is not going through a list, but picking something where you can really embody it. Something like, well, I just met your little dog, Rosie, Rachel. And to be honest with you, after meeting Rosie once, I could think about how she came up to me on the couch and warmed up to my body, and just about how amazing animals make me feel. I could think of Rosie and in a moment really feel that swelling that I feel around animals. So thinking about a specific memory or a specific animal, a specific person, a specific instance, and trying to live through it again, living through that memory. And that is a gratitude practice that will change your biochemistry rather than just list off a list of things you're grateful for, which probably won't. So that kind of practice in the morning is really helpful when you're talking about trying to set that mindset for yourself. And then the mindsets that you want to avoid are those fear states and high stress states. And not to say that we have penultimate control over the stress and fear in our lives, but again, when we tend to stay in the present moment and think about what we want in the future, it really works against those fear states. It's also really hard to be fearful and gracious at the same time. So when you're thinking of gratitude, you're probably not also in fear.
So, Dr. Campanile, how do we signal to our body by rewarding it that this is a habit that we want to make part of our lives?
Yeah, great. So rewarding a behavior once you have put the pedal to the metal and you're actually doing it and you want it to stick is worth thinking about. You want to make that very high value. So number one, just the repetition of it. As I said, that brain loves to learn. So the more you stick on a habit, the more your brain will naturally want to master it. That is something when you think about that gratitude practice that we just talked about in the beginning, it might feel like it's sort of helpful. But as you do it, as day to day, you get used to asking yourself what you're grateful for. It's interesting because your brain wants to do better on the test the next morning. So it's going to start looking for things in your day that it's grateful for, and your brain will adapt to that. So the more you stick with something, and then everybody kind of knows that, but I just want you to know that even if it feels like you're not making progress, if your count number is going up, your brain is actually truly getting hungrier at performing there better. The other thing is that making something rewarding. Well, you mentioned before stacking it, giving people dopamine. How do you make sure that your brain registers this as helpful and rewarding? Well, there's natural times in the day when we are releasing things like that. The first 8 hours of the day is where we think we are in that dopaminergic epinephrine mode and we are receptive, looking for new challenges. And later in the day is when we are consolidating serotonin, telling ourselves that everything is settled and okay for the night. So things that are difficult for you, high level challenges, things with a lot of limbic friction that take a lot of motivation, maybe time them earlier in the day. Do those things in the morning. Pair them with things, stack them, as you said, with maybe if those things are hard for me, I'm going to do that one with my friend. We're going to pair community. Maybe I'm going to do this one after my morning coffee because my morning coffee always rewards me. So I'm going to pair that reward with my new task. So the more you can stack things, the body loves that. Stacking is now a double, triple reminder on that neuron that this is happening and it's happening again. So it will get prepared for the next time. Another thing you can do is track your progress. It's amazing how the brain loves to see that report card. So tracking your progress, and for some people, this is journaling. For some people, this is biofeedback by maybe wearing a night Oura ring and seeing that you're actually sleeping better, or glucose monitor, seeing your insulin curves aren't as erratic. This is very rewarding for the body to see its internal progress. I would also encourage you to add maybe some identity namers in there. So rather than just journaling about how many bowel movements did I have and what was my mood today, maybe putting some of those identity features on there, like my goal with this new habit is to be somebody who is more excited by their environment. I want to notice more things, something like that. You should absolutely start tracking that in your day-to-day journal. How much did I enjoy? How much did I look around today? If that's valuable to you in your identity goal setting, absolutely track it in your day-to-day journal. It will reward you when you see it happening.
I love the way that you're describing that, because it's so different from the way we think about journaling, which is this is what I did today, but thinking about it future looking, and that identity base where I want to be the type of person who does take in everything that is around me and is present in the moment. And hey, I'm noticing myself doing it, and I've written it down, which we know is also so powerful.
Yes, great.
Okay, so this has been possibly our longest podcast, but it has been worth every minute. This information is so valuable. So I guess final question for you, Dr. Campanile, is for our listeners. Obviously, what we always say is come to Skyterra. If you come to Skyterra, you'll be able to have access to Dr. Campanile. You'll also be able to be in a community of people who are working on building healthy habits. You'll be fed really well. You'll get that dopamine, and definitely you'll feel safe at the end of the day. But for folks who aren't able to come to Skyterra, what do you recommend?
In essence, have a strong image and learn to reward yourself. And when you wrap it up like that, it should be pretty exciting. And the identity part of this is about making sure you have a strong identity-based goal that you're aiming for. Make it really about how you view yourself as a person, who you value in your environment, and what you're aiming for in the long term. Consider writing this down. Write a mantra to remind yourself. You can track yourself daily based on these kind of identity targets. Morning visualization is a great way to do this. So thinking about 3 things I'm working on in my life, and that will really encourage you to think about that in a broader view and in a more positive view. Restructure anything. If you have the tendency to say, I want to stop doing this habit, restructure that into an identity, future, forward-looking goal. Say, I am working on being a person who nurtures myself, instead of I am working on not eating that. So that is a very powerful shift in and on its own. Changing your mindset, even if it doesn't relate to your goal, is another great way to keep yourself in a receptive state for change. So introducing regular habits of gratitude, positivity, and love, they work against our states of fear and anger and retrospective thinking. So that's how you can think about building your goals. Once you start to do a new habit, make it really rewarding. Stack it during a time of the day when you are already likely to be experiencing reward. You're going to be interacting with friends. You're going to be making one of your favorite breakfasts. Put a new task around that. It will absolutely take more. And then save kind of the easier, if you're somebody who's good at hydration and that's something you tend towards doing anyways, do those easier ones later in the day. The ones that kind of reinforce and relax you, warm you at the end of the day. Send yourself those signals at the end of the day that you did a great job and it's time to consolidate and prepare for the next day. So those are some ways that you can reinforce habit and reward in your home life.
Anything else, Dr. Campanile? This has been so valuable for me personally and for our listeners, I know.
Well, I think I just want to leave you with, if you're still having a hard time with changing your chemistry and your patterns, it is something that we are experts at here at Skyterra. We really pride ourselves on teaching people what that looks like. And again, piggybacking off of the community drive to do this together as a team is not just nice to think about, but it's biochemically accurate and effective.
Yeah, other guests who want you to succeed, and a whole staff of people here at Skyterra who want to see your success as well.
Yes.
Thank you again, Dr. Campanile. This has been excellent. We will definitely have you back on.
Thank you.
Thanks, listeners.